Welcome to another episode of Don't Be Lookup, where we talk to operators of D2C brands and learn how they're leveraging data to drive profitable growth. We are super lucky to have David Baker here today from Beekman 1802. He is the Chief Digital Officer, and we will be diving in. So, David, just to get started, love to kind of hear about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I've been working in the digital space for close to 15 years now at this point. But I got my start working sort of in a non-traditional way from I think a lot of people in this space. I started out wanting to work on a political campaign and become a field organizer. Digital wasn't on my mind, and I walked in, and my campaign manager said, "Hey, you're going to do for us what Obama's doing." And I went, he has 30 people and $100 million. I have a MacBook and like barely a degree. Sure. And she said that you know how much money he has and how much people he has. You're already more qualified than anybody else here. We're going to figure it out. And to me, that was very, I think, endemic of how the digital ecosystem is. If you have the mindset of you'll figure this out, you will. So I start there working on a couple of campaigns, doing everything in digital, which back then meant very little. It was blog writing, it was community management and organization online, it was sort of the website, and a little bit of ads. And I worked in politics for several years, all the way through the end of the 2014 cycle, where I worked for candidates, I worked for Super PAC, I worked for Google, where I spent about 3.5, 4 years working on their election team, working with elections, government, nonprofits, basically everything without a bottom line, trying to do e-commerce conversion, which was very fun and challenging. And then I went to business school, where I really wanted to see how could I apply all of the tactics I learned in the digital political space into a non-political environment. So I used business school to help bridge that. Ultimately started a consulting firm of my own before business school, and then continued with clients after business school, before joining L'Oreal, where I helped build their in-house media buying team, growing that from a single campaign to over $75 million worth of spend annually, which was a lot and a lot of fun. I spent about 4 years at L'Oreal working across multiple brands, and then went agency side for a little bit, working across e-commerce and non-e-commerce brands, sort of really understanding that creative journey, as well as the overall media side. This was right in the iOS world when creative started becoming king, so was really grateful there. And then went back to beauty here at Beekman 1802, where I lead all of our D2C sales, our Amazon, and all of our media efforts.
And on that, especially that point you just said about e-commerce versus non-e-commerce kind of clients you worked with, what do you kind of learn about both those differences? Like, is it the same concepts you're trying to apply across both those types of businesses, or is it just vastly different given like what their objectives are?
I think it really, for me, it gives me better perspective. I think I've seen a lot of takes on Twitter of people talking about how much of a bubble the D2C space can be, and how everyone's talking like, yeah, my brand is 90% D2C and 10% Amazon, and comparing to enterprise brands that are, 80% retail. And really, I think for me, it gives me that context, but also it help me understand the overall shift that and maturity curve that brands are going through when it comes to brands being like, hey, like we need to focus on top of funnel awareness. Sometimes they're talking about top of funnel awareness in Meta, and sometimes they're talking about linear TV. And that difference is wide, and really understanding that overall and where it fits for a particular brand in their life cycle, as well as sort of all of the broad access to tools that can help you drive that. So that's where when you're working with a non-e-commerce brand, how do you know where to spend your next dollar? You leverage MMM tools, you leverage multiple different attribution tools to try and drive that. I got a very good grounding there in those tools. It's helped me today as well.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. You opened yourself up to a lot of questions now, for me at least. But when it comes down to like understanding like those points of that maturity curve, like what are the identifiers for you to understand? I think you said it well. Meta, there's maybe a ceiling. Then you have TV. Like what are the points you look for when you're saying, okay, we're actually ready to start exploring these strategies?
Yeah, I think a lot of times brands, from what I've heard and talked to in the D2C space, will think about maturity curve in terms of media channel. Hey, I maxed out on Meta. Meta and Google. I need to look for a new channel. Is it Pinterest? Is it TikTok? Is it CTV? Is it programmatic? Where I think about that maturity curve is less so in terms of media channel and more in terms of distribution channel. As you grow, in particular, your distribution, that is a massive game changer into how you should be thinking about your media, how you should be thinking about that impact. Because let's be honest, if you're running a TV commercial nationwide and you're only selling online, there's a lot of people who won't buy from you online. They're going to be looking for you in store. So that is waste right there from a lot of perspective, or opportunity as you're expanding into new distribution. So I think about it in more of the maturity curve of a distribution. So once you have brick and mortar retail, whether you're owned or with an amazing retail partner, that shifts your maturity into a different space. That sort of is a very strong signal of where you are and where you're growing to. When I look at some of the giants in the space who have partnerships with Target or with Costco or with Ulta, that is a very different maturity curve than a pure play D2C Amazon business.
Opening up the door a little bit of now thinking about media mix when you're across, let's say, an online and then retail channel. So I liked your point about distribution. So how do you think about supporting distribution with kind of that offline to online media mix decision making?
Yeah. So I think there are really two ways to take this, and I'm going to take my way first, and I'll probably take your way second. I think first it is in recognizing what can be measured versus what can't and accepting that. I think I've heard a lot of people in the space talk about how, hey, as soon as you go into retail, you lose that visibility. It is akin to losing the visibility we all lost with iOS 14. You no longer have that as sure of a connection. So is your pixel firing in the right way and are you collecting all that attribution? Those nuances that we fight about in D2C sometimes are not as relevant when you're supporting that retail channel as well, because you know you're going to be supporting sales and capturing sales, that halo effect. But how do you measure that? I think that's one. I think as well, how do you support that is more in the vein of one, either doing great testing. So whether that is an incrementality holdout test, whether that is MMM modeling, whether that is time series, I think there are a couple of different ways you can approach testing out the effectiveness of that media. But it is a mix of both performance and measurable impact, as well as relational impact with the retailer. I think a lot of partners that we've worked with will see us supporting and tagging them in our media or driving to their store as very valuable for both their brand and our sales. And that can be a valuable trade in terms of display and end cap, other things, because they know that that's going to improve the sell-through on our items, but also drive people to their store. And their AOV as a retailer is higher than ours is in their store.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our listeners are probably thinking about how to get into retail, whether they're CPG or, getting into beauty. I know Ulta is obviously a big partner of yours. What kind of data do you get back from those retail partners to know that sales are going up? And how do you kind of unify that with your D2C data as well?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the retailer and depends on your relationship with them. I think the best data you can get is by store, by week, by SKU. That really gets you great velocity data, and you can tell the impact across the board. Some retailers will give you nationwide by SKU by week. Some will give you by door by week, but not by SKU. So really, like there is a data quality with that retailer sort of getting all of that in. But I think having that data allows you to see very clearly what is the momentum you're driving when you're in media with in market with media around product A versus product B. That's where you're able to pull that data in to see, do we see this lift here? Do we see an impact when we're on air, or is it the total brand? So if we're running a product ad, are we looking at that lift on product A, or are we looking at the lift on the total brand? That is really where that comes into play. For us, we look at that and we pull that data in and look at it a couple of different ways. I think one is seeing what is the impact of our digital media on brick and mortar sales, sort of very separated. I think as well, the best data I've seen is when you can look at that more holistically. You'll never get a single customer ID journey across everything else, but through tying in how people and asking your consumers key questions, how they're buying, where they're buying from, be able to use that data to start to form the personas and the pictures of who you're targeting and who you're reaching and where that's driving. So for instance, we're able to ask our consumers in a post-purchase survey, where do you shop for beauty? Do you shop at Target, at Walmart, at Sephora, at Ulta, at the drugstore, on Amazon, other? And we're able to look at how their behavior shifts differently if they are an Ulta shopper versus a Target shopper versus a Sephora shopper. That allows us to really start to look at that and build a persona around that consumer and target people who look like that as we're trying to recruit the highest value consumers to our brand.
And I might be asking even the wrong question. So, how do you think about like the .com versions of those retailers and how that interacts? Or is it pretty similar to the results you typically see with in-store? Or are they just very different channels? And how do you think about those?
Yeah, I think the retailer.com evolution is ongoing. I think that very much varies by retailer. I think most of them are now starting to view themselves as an omnichannel retailer. And so they'll look at sales holistically and report out to you in a very similar way, those sales, but you do not get pixel data back. You do not get conversion data back. You don't get any of that, which is fair. That is their consumer data. There's all sorts of privacy challenges there as well as sort of business issues. But it is trying to work with those partners to build in that right visibility. So do they see the lift in .com as well as brick and mortar? I think that's where you start to see some of that. In my past, when I worked at a larger company that had access to throw their weight around, we were able to broker some of those deals. But for D2C brands, I don't think you're going to get a lot of data out of a retailer.com. Just like you don't get conversion data directly out of Amazon.
And do you not really then kind of think about that as part of like your overall sales or media mix? Is it kind of like an afterthought where you're on the marketplace for them, or does it actually still become like an intentional part of the strategy? Be saying, hey, I want to target.com, I want to increase my sales here. How do you actually even go tactically to do that?
Yeah, I think absolutely it's a part of the overall strategy. I think it's growing our digital penetration is key as a brand overall, because I think it proves the strength of the consumer's willingness to buy online. And if they're willing to buy online with a retailer, why are they not willing to buy online with us directly? And how do we build that? There's not a direct link in the data, so it's a little bit divorced than your traditional D2C. But it is something where absolutely that is part of the strategy, is ensuring growth across the board. And those companies absolutely want to show to their shareholders growth in digital penetration as well. So I think everyone's incentivized to grow digital overall.
Awesome.
Yeah, that actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, one more on that, and I'll leave it be. But it's actually related to a topic we talked about, which is TikTok, actually, and it kind of goes into this. I know TikTok, like Shops, for instance, was pushing a lot of incentives to drive shops, basically like subsidizing brands. I want to come back to TikTok Shops in a second, but are you seeing any similar subsidies from the online store .coms? Because maybe they do want to push the narrative. Like, are they giving you incentives to actually be on those marketplaces in a deeper way?
To be on the marketplaces, I'm not necessarily qualified to answer. I think it's more around the overall retailer relationship. I think we would look at those incentives as part of any promotional strategy with a retailer, whether that is brick and mortar or .com. Hey, we want to drive sales on this SKU. So during Black Friday, this is the offer we're going to go into market with. So we partner with them on that. And sometimes those offers are their own currency. So their rewards points or free shipping or other aspects in their ecosystem. Sometimes that's early access for their VIP members. There are a couple of different parts of the overall promotional offer that come into play. I think those are very different from sort of the TikTok subsidy piece. But at the end of the day, from the consumer perspective, it's promotion. And it's how am I getting this? How am I getting the products I want at the price I'm willing to pay for them?
Makes sense. I want to change gears a little bit. I know, David, you come from the political background. We're obviously going into an election year in 2024 here, and just want to get from your perspective, what are some things that brands should be looking out for, and what have you noticed in terms of the different platform marketplaces, the CPMs on election years, and we can dive in a little deeper.
Yeah, I think if there's one takeaway I would say from what you just said that I would change is we are not entering election year. We are in the middle of it already. And if you don't think that, then you're behind. It's not too late, but I do think it's worth really considering the impact the election is going to have on this year. And I think as well, technically coupled with the Olympics, I think both of those are major events where the market outside of the regular year cycle is going to have an influx of spend. And we know CPMs are a product of supply and demand, and there's going to be a lot more demand on the platform because these advertisers are jumping in. So the Olympics, massive amount of spend overall that will raise, but elections in particular, the election is projected to spend about $10 billion of political advertising across all channels, not just digital. Within digital, it's going to be about 2 to 3 billion. That's an entire Procter & Gamble's worth of advertising shoved into Meta, Google, YouTube, and CTV, all of which price largely off of CPM. Especially as we get closer and closer to the election and key moments, we're going to see an influx of spend on those and rising in prices. And then they will plummet on November 6th. Now, a lot of big advertisers will also know to hold back until November 6th. So there'll be a little bit of volatility that week. But realistically, all of these players are going to jump in. Now, they're going to jump in a couple of different ways. Linear TV, as we all know from the election cycles, as you get closer, you just can't turn off the TV. Like, you can't turn off political ads. They're just everywhere. They are buying 1,000 points of TV, which is basically just complete saturation of a market for two reasons. One, to try and actually persuade voters, but two, to block their opponents from being able to also buy those ads. So for them, it is a zero-sum game, and they're willing to spend a lot of money and a lot of waste to drive people out. We see that in YouTube prices. So back in my past, the average cost per view on YouTube was on a TrueView ad was like 6 cents. During the election cycle, in the week leading up to the election in battleground states, it was $1.50 per view. That massive increase is because they're just trying to buy as much media as they can and dominate the conversation and block people out, and those will raise prices. You saw the same thing with CTV prices 4 years ago, and now that more and more D2C brands are getting involved in CTV or linear TV, you're going to see that impact you, particularly from Labor Day to Election Day. That window, those last 100 days, is really when that spend will hockey stick to an extreme. They'll spike during the primaries a little bit, but not really. We're out of that cycle. They'll spike around convention time. And from convention to Labor Day, they'll rise. And then from Labor Day upwards to Election Day. It is their Black Friday. They will be in platform buying as much media as they can. And digital in particular is the media they can buy in that last week, because TV has to get locked, linear TV has to get locked up a week in advance. Postcards have to be dropped by the Thursday before to be able to hit for Election Day. So from Wednesday until Tuesday, that last week, it's all digital. And so everyone will be dropping as much media as they can in that time frame. As a D2C brand, you need to be aware of that. How do you plan accordingly your promotional calendar for November? How do you plan your early Black Friday offer? I know a lot of brands this last year went live with Black Friday November 1st, and I even saw a couple go live October 30th. And Mariah Carey waits until November, but other brands were going early in terms of their Christmas deals. I think you're going to see some softness in those 2 days, which I think plan accordingly there, and plan as well from a media perspective. Your media is going to be less effective because of the increase in CPMs. And so you need to nail that messaging and nail that media and the timing around it. I can go on, but I'm going to breathe for a little bit.
Yeah, I think I don't know, such good points there about the planning cycle. It almost seems like too, you made a point about kind of crowding out potential competitors. I'm more in the political landscape, but do you see that in the D2C space at all, where let's say you are a larger brand, you have better unit economics, you can afford to take a hit maybe on the CPMs, and maybe you're in an awareness-based category, maybe you are better to be in market, that time and crowd out kind of the competitors. What do you think about that? Or have you seen that out in the market at all?
I think there is the potential to try and play counter. I think there are definitely are brands who might say, look, we can go out there with a message that is so anti-political that we can capture some of the people who are just fed up with politics, and it'll be very refreshing. I think that same mindset is why you saw some beauty brands advertising the Super Bowl. You wouldn't normally think about a beauty brand in the Super Bowl, but that worked partially because it's counter-cyclical. So there is potentially some strategy there if you're trying to go counter-cyclical, but you got to nail that right, and that's a big bet. So I think that's a risk. I think as well, where I thought you were going with it is I'm not seeing that same need to crowd out people in the D2C market outside of this time frame. There's enough room in the sandbox for all of us to play. And when we think about going back to earlier of the maturity curve, I heard other people talk. I heard the operators talk on their podcast around Hexpad was talking to a retailer, and they're like, "Who are you?" And I think a lot of people on this call absolutely knows who Hexpad is. They think this is a big, massive brand, and the retailer's like, "I've never heard of you." I think that to me proves just how much space there is for everybody to play in.
Are you thinking at all about how to bring in like a political angle or even like a America First type angle into your ads, given that we are in this election year and that's front of mind for a lot of consumers?
I think that that's not an angle that we as a brand are willing to go into. I think we'll always look at that. I mean, our products are made here in the US, but I think for us, I think the political ecosystem is very volatile, and I think people have a lot of opinions on it. And I think I don't want to enter into that risky situation. I think there are key places where we have a right to speak up and we have a right to voice our views. This is not one of them, and I don't think it does any services to the brand or to our business to do so.
Now,
no one wants to hear from skincare brands about the election.
We do. Only us, maybe. But I mean, keeping the political theme, we actually had a conversation about TikTok, a few weeks ago when there was legislation forming around potentially banning TikTok. Now that legislation is moving through in a large way. How do you think that's going to impact the ecosystem, with using TikTok, experimenting on TikTok, leveraging TikTok as a diversification channel? Where do you see this going potentially?
Yeah, I'm very curious to see where it goes overall. I think I was very bullish on it when we last talked. I think it I don't know if it had passed the House yet or not. It was very close. I think they were debating
Yeah.
it when we last talked. For those listening now or in the future, it's passed the Senate, so it's gonna happen. The divestment bill. I think where definitely it's being challenged in the courts, and we'll see how long of a process it actually takes. I think the 9 month time frame may not materialize, given the court process. I do think it's worth really investigating the the bandwidth it takes to spin up a new channel, as well as the payoff. I think there's still very much so much culture that is happening on TikTok, and your brand is being influenced by TikTok, whether you know it or not. So I think there is a lot of ample opportunity, and we had a call with our TikTok reps the very next day, and they were not backing down or slowing down at all. So I think how much of that is posturing, I don't know. But I do think that the space itself has room for it. I think they have nailed the discoverability and the closed loop of the store together in one ecosystem that's really powerful. And I think whether that same model is with TikTok 2 years from now or has been cloned by Zuck or by Jeff, I don't know. But I do think that that's where I think the future is headed, is into creator-led, affiliate forward, closed loop sales. I think that's going to represent a large chunk of potential for discoverability, as well as having that halo effect beyond just that shop. So I think I'm still cautiously bullish on it. I think there's still a good wealth of opportunity, but if you're not already there and you're trying to play catch up there and you don't know if it's going to be around anymore, I think it is in this limbo space for the next little bit.
Yeah, and I know you talked about kind of one of the biggest risks, even with for Amazon with TikTok, given that discoverability closed loop, part of it. Is that still going to hold true for you and as an investment today, with all this
Yeah.
news?
Yeah. So I think I want to recap one of those things that we said in this conversation as well. I think we talked a good chunk about TikTok and how a lot of people, especially I think if it's divested, will be looked at as an alternative to Facebook or YouTube as a social platform. I think that TikTok is very quickly not a social platform. It is a commerce platform that has a very powerful discoverability engine. If you're comparing TikTok to Meta, shift your thinking and compare it to Amazon. They are building Fulfill by TikTok, similar to FBA. They literally call the platform you log into Seller Central. Most of the team they're hiring is coming from Amazon. They are very much coming for Amazon's business. So I would put it in that relationship. And I think if TikTok doesn't divest and remains in its current form, that's a big opportunity for D2C brands that I think becomes that third distribution channel after Shopify and Amazon, and has, for some brands, maybe number one or number two, depending on how they get their start and where they focus on. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think if there is a divestment and TikTok itself is no longer on U.S. shores or is sold off, I think that could absolutely change. So I think that's something we're going to watch closely on. But as of right now, that wouldn't go into effect in this calendar year. So I think there's still opportunity to test and learn there a little more cautiously, but to see is there something there for our brand? And I think that very much varies by brand and by product on that platform, because the flywheel on TikTok is very SKU forward, not brand forward.
Obviously, it's really interesting. You're talking about kind of with TikTok versus Amazon, especially because we're seeing, I think, the data points of with TikTok, you're seeing low AOV products, for instance, sell, more through, let's say, D2C, or at least I've seen across brands. And then you have the discoverability aspect. And then it seems like you probably have the data connectivity with a customer even better, let's say within your D2C storefront. So are you seeing that as well, where let's say if someone does purchase on TikTok shops, you're getting better data, transfer even, let's say, than you might get from Amazon?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. Well, every question you ask, there's like 8 different ways to go down it. I think from an AOV, really just comparing the two platforms, I think AOV we can dive in a little bit on, but I really think that's a base more around your units per transaction. On Amazon, generally, your units per transaction is 1.1, 1.2. People are buying the product, not the brand. Now, as a consumer, they're going to put multiple things in their cart and have them all sent to them the next day. I think Amazon wins on that distribution shipping angle. TikTok, you still see about 1.1 to 1.2 units per transaction. Very few people are buying two things from a brand. I don't know what that looks like cross brand, but very similar in that realm. I think from an AOV perspective, I'm seeing $300 treadmills start popping now. So I am seeing that grow on Amazon. I'm seeing appliances. I'm seeing stuff in the $150 range, as well as skincare that is not mass pricing. So we're seeing a lot of range in that, and I think part of that is more due to the consumer's comfort in adopting and trusting that brand that they may never have heard of before because of the discoverability platform. And also, I think getting used to the mechanics of that platform. I remember on Amazon, and even today, when I go and buy an Amazon product, I'm checking to make certain, is this thing just a drop shipper? Is it good product? What are the ratings and reviews? That impacts me more than the AOV. I'll make a high AOV purchase on Amazon if it's from a reputable brand that I know and trust. And I think that's where there is a marketplace difference in terms of the merchants between the two. TikTok Shop, I believe, had something like 4% of the merchants that Amazon does, which I think it's not there yet in its maturity to be growing there. But I think that's generally, I think, just where it's building to if it has the runway to do so. So
next time you'll answer my 7 other, you'll give me the 7 answers next time.
absolutely,
Not enough
I
time.
will.
Percent is also a lot higher than I would anticipate, especially for them, just recently launching. So
Yeah, it may not even be that high. I'll pull that and we can put it in the show notes from what I
love
had.
it. Cool. Yeah, last question for me. We like to ask all our guests this one question. What is your North Star metric?
See, the thing is, I did prep for this and I thought about it, but then I forgot. I think realistically, it's because there is no one North Star. I think you do have to look at everything across the way. For me, it really does come into first order profitability. I think that to me is the North Star that unlocks scale. That is the North Star that unlocks health of the business and really has so many other metrics buried inside of it to really help drive. That's the effectiveness of your media. That is the ability for you to survive from a cash flow perspective. That is health of your contribution margin and really able to drive there. That to me is that North Star.
Cool. Well, Will, any last questions from you?
No, David, this is a great session. So thanks for joining. And yeah, hopefully we'll have you back on. We'll see how the election cycle goes. And if your predictions all come true.
We'll have election coverage with David Baker and Walt Blitzer.
And for everyone listening, where can they find you on the interwebs?
On the interwebs, you can find me mostly in the comments of Twitter. I review Scarlet X, but on Twitter you can find me. My handle is data. So data.
Awesome. Thank you so much.